In today's Brain Feed Lab video, we're counting down the 5 most dangerous hurricanes ever recorded. Hurricanes are nature's most terrifying display of power, unleashing winds that can tear cities apart and bringing oceans crashing onto the land. Number 5. Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina began as a tropical depression near the Bahamas on August 23, 2005. As it moved through warm waters and favorable atmospheric conditions, it intensified into a tropical storm by August 24th. Katrina made its first landfall as a Category 1 hurricane near Miami, Florida on August 25th, causing minor damage and flooding. However, once Katrina entered the Gulf of Mexico, it encountered exceptionally warm sea surface temperatures about 30 degrees Celsius and low wind shear, allowing for rapid intensification. By August 28th, Katrina reached Category 5 status with peak winds of 280 kilometers an hour and a minimum central pressure of 902 hectopascals. At its peak, Katrina was one of the most powerful hurricanes ever recorded in the Gulf of Mexico. Katrina made its second and most devastating landfall on August 25, 2005, along the Louisiana-Mississippi border as a Category 3 hurricane. Although the storm had weakened slightly before landfall, it was still an extremely large and destructive hurricane, with hurricane-force winds extending over 190 kilometers from its center. New Orleans, Louisiana, which lies below sea level and is protected by an extensive system of levees, experienced catastrophic flooding due to widespread levee failures. About 80% of the city was submerged underwater, reaching depths of up to 6 meters in some areas. This flooding lasted for weeks, compounding the destruction caused by the hurricane's winds and storm surge. In Mississippi, the storm surge completely destroyed coastal towns such as Biloxi and Gulfport, where homes, businesses, and casinos were washed away. Coastal highways, bridges, and roads were rendered unusable. The Mississippi Gulf Coast experienced the highest storm surge from Katrina, measuring 8.5 meters in height, which wiped out most structures along the shore. In Alabama, cities like Mobile experienced significant flooding and wind damage. Coastal areas were swamped by the storm surge, and the downtown area of Mobile was inundated. Hurricane Katrina was one of the deadliest hurricanes in U.S. history. It caused at least 1,836 deaths, the majority of which were in Louisiana and Mississippi. Over 1 million people were displaced, with many residents of New Orleans evacuated to other parts of the U.S. for months or even years. It took years for many families to return home, and some areas of New Orleans remain uninhabited to this day. The total estimated economic loss from Hurricane Katrina was around $125 billion, making it the costliest hurricane in U.S. history at the time. Tens of thousands of homes were destroyed, particularly in New Orleans and coastal Mississippi. Bridges, highways, and power lines were severely damaged. More than 700,000 homes were either completely destroyed or suffered severe damage. Number 4. Hurricane Wilma. Hurricane Wilma was part of the extremely active 2005 Atlantic hurricane season, which was one of the most intense and record-breaking seasons in history. Wilma formed from a tropical depression in the Western Caribbean Sea on October 15, 2005. Between October 18th and October 19th, Wilma went from a Category 1 hurricane to a Category 5 in less than 24 hours. Its pressure dropped dramatically from 970 hectopascals to 882 hectopascals, setting the record for the lowest pressure ever recorded in the Atlantic. This sudden intensification made Wilma one of the most powerful hurricanes ever observed. At its peak, Wilma had maximum sustained winds of 295 kilometers an hour, in an eye that measured as small as 3.7 kilometers across, which is one of the smallest eyes ever recorded in a hurricane. Wilma first made landfall on October 21, 2005, on Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, particularly devastating the resort areas of Cancun and Cozumel. It was a slow-moving storm at this point, which resulted in prolonged exposure to extremely strong winds, torrential rain, and storm surges. Some areas of the Yucatan received more than 1,500 millimeters of rain, leading to severe flooding. Hundreds of homes, businesses, and hotels were destroyed or severely damaged. Roads were washed out, and large areas were left without power for weeks. The storm devastated the region's tourism industry, causing extensive economic losses. Before hitting Mexico, Wilma caused heavy rains and flooding in Cuba. The storm displaced thousands of people, and large swaths of farmland were damaged. After stalling over Mexico for several days, Wilma moved northeastward, making a second landfall on October 24, 2005 in Florida, near Cape Romano, as a Category 3 hurricane with sustained winds of 195 km/h. Wilma cut across the state from the Gulf of Mexico to the Atlantic Ocean, causing significant damage in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and the Florida Keys. Although weakened from its peak strength, the hurricane's winds knocked out power to 6 million people in Florida. Wilma's storm surge flooded coastal areas, and heavy rainfall caused localized flooding. The Everglades region and coastal communities like Naples and Marco Island were especially hard hit. Wilma then moved over the Bahamas as a weakened storm, but it still caused flooding, property damage, and significant power outages. In total, Wilma caused 87 deaths, 23 directly from storm-related incidents and 64 indirectly from post-storm effects, such as accidents, exposure, and medical issues. Total damages from Hurricane Wilma were estimated to be around $29.4 billion, making it one of the costliest hurricanes in U.S. history at the time. Number 3. Hurricane Irma. Hurricane Irma formed from a tropical wave near the Cape Verde Islands on August 30, 2017. The hurricane traveled westward across the Atlantic, intensifying rapidly. It passed through the northern Caribbean, striking islands like Barbuda, St. Martin, and the Virgin Islands, before eventually impacting Cuba, the Bahamas, and the southeastern U.S., particularly Florida. Irma first made landfall on the small island of Barbuda on September 6, 2017, with Category 5 intensity. It caused near-total destruction, with around 95% of buildings damaged or destroyed. Irma devastated St. Martin and the British Virgin Islands shortly after, leaving widespread destruction, cutting off access to basic services and displacing thousands of people. Although the eye of Irma did not directly hit Puerto Rico, the island still experienced severe flooding, wind damage, and widespread power outages. Irma made landfall in Cuba as a Category 5 storm on September 8, 2017, battering the northern coast. It was the first Category 5 storm to hit Cuba since 1924. Many coastal towns were inundated, and Havana experienced significant flooding. After weakening slightly, Irma made landfall in the Florida Keys on September 10th as a Category 4 storm, before making a second landfall near Marco Island. The storm caused massive power outages, heavy rainfall, and widespread flooding across Florida, especially in Miami, Naples, and Jacksonville. Irma was one of only a few hurricanes to maintain Category 5 strength for more than 48 hours, with peak sustained winds reaching 295 kilometers an hour for 37 hours. It was the first hurricane on record to affect the Leeward Islands at such a high intensity. The total damages caused by Hurricane Irma were estimated at around $77 billion, making it the fifth costliest hurricane in U.S. history. Irma caused over 130 deaths across its entire path, including 92 in the United States and at least 44 in the Caribbean. Many fatalities were a result of drowning, building collapses, and the aftermath of the storm. Ahead of Irma's landfall in Florida, one of the largest evacuations in U.S. history was ordered, with over 6 million people evacuating from vulnerable areas. Millions were left without power, and in Florida, more than 7 million customers lost electricity, some for weeks. Number 2. Typhoon Haiyan. Typhoon Haiyan, known locally in the Philippines as Super Typhoon Yolanda, was a catastrophic tropical cyclone that developed in the western Pacific Ocean. It started as a tropical depression on November 2, 2013, over the warm waters of the South Pacific. Over the next 2 days, Haiyan rapidly intensified, and by November 6, 2013, it had become a Category 5 on the Saffir-Simpson scale. Haiyan's intensification was driven by exceptionally warm sea surface temperatures and low wind shear, which allowed it to strengthen rapidly. At its peak, the typhoon had maximum sustained winds of 315 kilometers an hour with gusts up to 380 kilometers an hour, making it one of the strongest tropical cyclones ever recorded at landfall in terms of wind speed. Its central pressure dropped to 895 hectopascals. Haiyan made its first landfall on November 7, 2013, in the eastern Visayas region of the Philippines, particularly affecting the islands of Samar and Leyte. The storm made 6 separate landfalls as it crossed the central Philippines, including in Tacloban City, which suffered the most devastating damage. After devastating the Philippines, Haiyan weakened slightly but remained dangerous as it continued westward toward Vietnam, making landfall there as a weaker system. The storm also impacted China and Taiwan, although to a lesser degree. The Philippines bore the brunt of Typhoon Haiyan's force, particularly the regions of Leyte, Samar, and eastern Visayas. The typhoon brought a lethal combination of extremely high winds, storm surge, and heavy rainfall, leading to widespread destruction. Haiyan's winds obliterated homes, buildings, and infrastructure. Entire villages were flattened, and some areas reported wind gusts as strong as 380 kilometers an hour. Wooden structures, power lines, and trees were all blown down. One of the most catastrophic aspects of Haiyan was the storm surge, particularly in Tacloban City. The storm surge reached up to 7 meters in height, flooding low-lying coastal areas and sweeping away everything in its path. Some areas saw up to 300 millimeters of rain in just a few hours. Haiyan is one of the deadliest tropical cyclones on record, with the official death toll at least 6,300 people in the Philippines. However, some estimates suggest that the number could be higher, given the vast number of people still missing or unidentified after the storm. Thousands more were injured. Over 4 million people were displaced by the typhoon. Total economic damage in the Philippines was estimated at $14 billion. Tacloban City, one of the worst-hit areas, saw its airport severely damaged, hampering initial relief efforts. Number 1. Hurricane Patricia. Hurricane Patricia formed as a tropical depression on October 20, 2015, off the Pacific coast of southern Mexico. Over the next 24 hours, the system quickly strengthened, becoming a tropical storm and then a hurricane by October 22, 2015. As it moved over warm ocean waters with low wind shear, Patricia experienced explosive intensification, one of the fastest ever recorded. Within just 24 hours, its wind speeds increased from 140 kilometers an hour to 325 kilometers an hour, making it a Category 5 hurricane. By October 23, 2015, Patricia had reached its peak intensity with sustained winds of 345 kilometers an hour, the strongest winds ever observed in a tropical cyclone in the Western Hemisphere. Its central pressure dropped to 872 hectopascals, making it one of the most intense tropical cyclones in recorded history. Patricia made landfall on the Mexican Pacific coast near Quixmala in the state of Jalisco on October 23, 2015, as a Category 5 hurricane. At the time of landfall, it had slightly weakened, but it still carried wind speeds of 240 kilometers an hour along with intense rainfall, dangerous storm surges, and large waves. The hurricane primarily affected the states of Jalisco, Colima, and Nayarit. These areas experienced heavy rainfall, flooding, and landslides, leading to significant damage to homes, power lines, infrastructure, and trees. However, because the region where Patricia made landfall was relatively sparsely populated, the damage was less severe than it could have been if it had struck a more populated area. Heavy rainfall, up to 500 millimeters in some areas. This led to the destruction of roads, bridges, and small communities. Remarkably, despite the storm's unprecedented strength, the death toll was relatively low, with 6 confirmed deaths. Mexican authorities evacuated tens of thousands of residents from coastal areas and set up emergency shelters. Schools and public buildings were used to house evacuees, and roads were cleared to facilitate movement.